Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today for spooky season, we're taking a look at a Japan-only RPG, and that happens to be Arms Heart, and it was released on the PSP in 2010. And the reason why I'm taking a look at this game is because it was directed by Matsuzo Machida, the same guy who created Shadow Hearts. And for those that know me already, yeah, you already know that it's one of my favorite games of all time. But in case this is your first time here, well now you already know that I love the games. For that, I've talked about them a lot on this channel. I reviewed all the games in the past, and I've even reviewed all like the other games that the same company has created, such as Fazly on the Neo Geo Pocket Color. I still don't know how to pronounce that damn name. I played through the whole game on a stream on this channel many years ago, and I tend to compare it to a lot of things that remind me of it a lot. And I can gush about it for 10 hours plus easily, but of course I don't want to make this into a 10-hour long video, so yeah, let's get moving on. So after when the company Nautilus shut down, a lot of people moved to the company Mistwalker to help create the game Lost Odyssey, but as for Matsudo Machida, however, well, he didn't go that route. He took a break off video games for a little bit, and eventually came up with ideas for this game, and the company that helped develop and publish the game happens to be Hamster. So I guess you can say that he ended up making this game of a bunch of hamsters. Okay, in all seriousness though, the company Hamster Corporation, they're mostly known for putting out a lot of old games on digital platforms such as the Arcade Archives, a bunch of Neo Geo stuff, and they also helped out with putting out some of the old retro games like PS1 classics on PS3's PSN, and the Nintendo eShop when that was still alive. But they have developed a couple games themselves, and the game Arms Heart, I can already tell you, is the one that stands out to me the most. But they also made games like the Conveni Portable on PSP and the DS, a convenience store simulator. Now that's a game I really need to get off my ass and play. So that covers all the general information and release history and all that, so now let's get talking about the game's story. So the game takes place in a steampunk looking world where it mainly focuses on the kingdom of Moldaria. And within this area there is a crime organization called the Lamb of Johann. So they're a pretty typical gang where they just get into all sorts of trouble, but the main character of this story happens to be a part of this gang, and his name happens to be Jana. So after a while, Jana got tired of all this shit, and decided to ditch the group because, well, they're just a bunch of crazy asses. But before he ditches them, he ends up stealing a homunculus from them because the gang was gonna do something really bad with it, so he ends up stealing it, and once he does, they all get pissed, and is not only wanted by the police, but even by his own gang. But one main important thing that I should mention about this gang is that everyone within this gang is actually a cyborg. For that, they get their hearts removed and get replaced by a mechanical one, and a lot of them happen to have mechanical arms to boot, so yes, that's why this game is called Arms Heart. So that's the basic summary of that, but of course there is some other things I do want to talk about, such as the characters. So I already went over Jana, the main character, but if there's anything else I do have to add to him is that he is very similar to Yuri in many aspects, for that they're both anti-heroes who happen to have a dark past, and they both have some dialogue that are very blunt and harsh, at least as far as I can tell. Because I'm sure you're all wondering is that, even though you don't speak Japanese, how do you understand all of this? Well, I'm using the good old-fashioned Hiko method. Putting Google Translate app on your phone and then pointing it at the screen with the camera option. It's the best way to doing it at this point, and it's gotten a lot better over the years, though obviously it's not perfect, and of course doing a direct translation of Japanese to English is not always the best, but it's the best of what we have to do with, and I was surprised that it actually worked as well as it did throughout this whole game. So anyways, let's get back and talk about the other three characters that join your party, such as our main female character, Odetta. And I have to say, that's actually a really cool name. So she was a character that was supposed to be the replacement of Jana ever since he left. So originally, she was going to just team up with you temporarily and then betray you to take your spot, but then realizes that everyone within the Lambs of Johann is a complete douchebag and then ends up signing with you anyways. And now, because she knows too much information, she is also a big target. And then there's two other characters who are actually related. They are family. So there's Priscilla, the daughter, and then you have the father named Dredd, and they are both blacksmith that works with machinery and makes weapons. And that's the most that I can say about them, unfortunately, but yeah, that's the basics of what you need to know about the main story and our main characters that come into our party. And yes, I can actually say that the story within this game is actually very interesting, and I really like the world that they created here. It's very different from the other games that he worked on, where that it was just historical fiction, where here, it's all completely original within a steampunk world. And I feel like you don't see a lot of steampunk-themed RPGs out there, especially one within this style. So now, let's get moving on and start talking about the gameplay. So just like the bajillion other RPGs that you played before, you walk around town in a top-down view, you buy items, you buy equipment to upgrade, and you go to different dungeons to progress through the story. You know, obvious stuff, right? But two things that do make this one a little bit different than your typical Shadow Hearts game is that there is some item crafting that you can do within this game, and you can also talk with the homunculus that you're trying to develop, and you talk to it by spending some malice points onto it. And each time you have a conversation with it, the more you'll know about the different characters, and you'll be able to get some new special abilities exclusive to Jana. Now, when it comes to the dungeons in this game, there is random encounters in here, and you do search out for chests that give out random items, and there is also little white dots that you find on the ground, which are always gear items. So what the gear items do is that they allow you to upgrade your character in 5 different slots, and that being physical attack, magic attack, and the last 3 have to do with having your attack space bigger, which I'll get to. But of course, if you're already familiar with Shadow Hearts, you probably already know what I mean. But then there's 3 special slots that you can add things to. So there's A, B, and C. And A usually is the elemental attack, or sometimes after the 3rd attack, you'll do a 4th elemental attack on an enemy that's always random. And the other 2 are extra physicals. And the more extra special plates that you add in here, the more you'll see your gear attack change. Well, since I'm talking about attacking and such, I guess I might as well get to the combat in the game, right? So, just like Shadow Hearts, it's a traditional turn-based RPG, but the cool thing is that whenever you attack, it has like a little mini-game to attack. It works exactly like the Judgment Ring, but of course it looks a little different, where instead of it being a little like radar sweeper going across a circle, instead, it's all about these gears, and you gotta make sure you gotta connect the blue dots with the gray or the red area, and getting the red area hit allows you to do a little bit more damage. So if you played a Shadow Hearts game before, you'll fit into this just fine. It may look confusing at first, but once you get it, it pretty much works exactly like that, and I like it quite a bit. And as for the attack menu, you got physical attack, magic skills, items, guard, and escape. And all the Shadow Hearts fan are probably wondering, well, where's the fusion? Well, unfortunately in this game, there is no fusion ability within here. And there's also no SP either that goes down every turn. So while this game does have a lot of similarities to Shadow Hearts, it's not exactly like it. But it does have enough similarities that, yeah, I'm pretty cool with it. And that's the basics of it. Of course, there's a bit more of it that I can say, but I'll save that for later. So for now, let's get moving on and start talking about the other things, like the graphics. And the graphics in this game are kind of all over the place. There's a lot of good things and a lot of not so good things. But as always, let's talk about the good things first. So I really do like the sprite work within this game for all like the main characters that you see on like the map screen. I do think they all look nice, and they remind me of something that you would see on the PS1 or the Sega Saturn for 2D games. Also, the game's backgrounds kind of have that pre-rendered look, which, like I've said many times on my channel, I'm a big fan of that style. And I do like the way the world looks in general. Like I've already said a bunch, it's a really cool looking steampunk world. Also, the character designs I do like quite a bit as well, even though they are very dark and edgy looking, but I mean, hey, I like that shit. And one character I do want to talk about briefly is that there is one villain character that looks like a Pellerman from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which is pretty wild. Also, if you're a Shadow Hearts fan, there are 2 Easter eggs within this game that I've noticed, although one of them is pretty obvious, and that is that there is a character in this game that looks exactly like Roger Bacon, but only in this game, he wears purple and he even has a top hat with a feather in it. I gotta be honest, out of all the different renditions of Roger Bacon, including what was shown from the upcoming game Pennyblood, I gotta admit, this might actually be my favorite looking version of him. Though of course in this game, his name is not Roger Bacon. Instead, his name is Professor Lindenbrock. I don't think I said that right, but that's the best that I can make out of it. And one Easter egg I did notice that I don't think most people would notice on their first time is that there's a dungeon in this game called Nightclub Wild Rose's Nectar. So for those that don't know, The director owns a studio called Studio Wild Rose, which is basically an art and photography studio that he also works on. So I thought that was a pretty nice touch. But yeah, going back to the other good things I can say about the graphics is that there are some monster designs that are pretty interesting looking, and some still have that same style as Shadow Hearts where they're just all sorts of messed up. For one example being a teacup ride being possessed, and this right here looks like straight up out of something out of an old school OVA. Also, a lot of the bosses that you fight within this game will transform into some sort of weird monstrosity, which also does remind me of old school OVA vibes, which I do really like a lot. And one last thing to mention about the good things is that I do like how every character's judgment ring, okay, I know it's not actually judgment ring, but you know, the whole attack gear thing. I do like how every character's attack ring looks different from each other. They all have a very unique look that fits that character. I do really like that, and I think it would be cool if the new game Pennyblood had something similar. But now, that's all the good things I can say about the graphics, but how about the not so good? Well, as much as I do like the sprite work within the map screen, there's quite a lot of NPC characters that look exactly the same. Now, I don't expect all of them to look 100% different. Like, I would be okay with a palette swap, like maybe change one of the characters' shirts to a different color or something, but no, they look straight up like the same way, even when they're like in the same room. Now, yes, this is a pretty minor thing, it's no big deal, but probably the worst aspect about the graphics is that the way how the battle screen is, I do feel like they kind of cheaped out on this. Now, I do like the way how the backgrounds look, and the way how the character portraits look, like for your characters, they look pretty good, but when it comes to like the enemies, like as you're fighting them, they're just a flat PNG file floating around on screen with no animation or anything. Now, I know I said that some of the monster designs are pretty interesting and cool looking, but I think if they would have used these designs and remade them into the same sort of sprite work that they used for the characters on the map screen, I think it would have made this game way more kick-ass looking and much more exciting to do the battles. Because I'm sure you've been looking at this and you're probably thinking, why does this look like a game that was made with RPG Maker? And you know what? You are not wrong on that, because I agree. So if that was like the one thing that they had to change about the graphics in this game, I would change that, because I think that alone would make this so much more exciting to watch. But I also should mention too that I do find that the animations for whenever your character's attacks also look very basic and cheap looking, and I do think that they should have used a different setup for the battles rather than using this first person view thing. They should have done it like the same way how a lot of classic RPGs do, where you have your character sprites on one side of the screen, enemies on the other, the heads-up display with the characters and the health bars and all that will be at the top or the bottom, and then all the attacking and the menu selecting would be in the middle or something. I think that would have made this look a lot more cooler to look at. Also, another complaint I have to mention too is that all the backgrounds that they use for the dungeons, they repeat all the same backgrounds over and over again. And it gets really, really repetitive, so I do wish that they would have came up with more different backgrounds for each dungeons and its themes. Like, I understand reusing some of it sometimes, but man, they reused it way too much. To a point where almost everything just started to look the same, and if it wasn't for this map screen, I would have thought I was just going around in a circle. So yeah, as much as I do like the way how the pre-rendered backgrounds look in some of these dungeons, they really could have used some more variety here. So yeah, that's all I have to say about the graphics overall. It's very much a mixed bag, and there is a lot of good things I can say about it that I do really like a lot, but then there's a lot of things that definitely felt like they cut a lot of corners. So now let's get moving on and start talking about the music. And I find it to be pretty decent in this game. Now, for all you Shadow Hearts fans out there, you all know that the music in all of the games are really damn good. Yes, even in the third game, it actually had a really good soundtrack as well. But I feel like this game doesn't reach the level of those games, but it does have a couple tracks that do stand out, and I do think are almost as good as a Shadow Hearts game. Personally, some of my favorite tracks in the game are the town music. Not only does it sound very similar to some of the town music within the second Shadow Hearts game, but I also just really like it a lot, and it even kind of gives me a little bit of that fall Halloween vibes to it. Most of the dungeon music in this game have some very fitting music to their themes, and I do like some of them. Some of them are pretty memorable. But even the tracks that are not memorable, they're not bad at all. And as for the battle music, so the boss themes I do like quite a bit, but when it comes to like the main battle ones, like the ones you're gonna hear throughout most of the game, I feel like that one is not my favorite. Now, it's not awful, but it's just not as intense or amazing as some of the battle music within the Shadow Hearts games. Even the third game's battle music, when you go to South America, that one is easily my least favorite out of the three games, but I would actually say that song probably is on the same level as this one. And it's easily my least favorite song out of this whole game, and the fact that you hear it as much as you do, yeah, it gets really tiresome. But now getting back to some of the more better things with the music is that there are some really nice piano tracks within this game that I do like quite a bit. And there are two songs in this game that do remind me of other games, but games that I was not really expecting. One of them happens to be a song that reminds me of Kagero Deception 2, which is amazing to me because that's another game that I also consider to be an all-time favorite, just like Shadow Hearts. And the other song that reminded me of something that's completely random is that the bar theme in this game really reminds me of something out of Banjo-Kazooie, believe it or not. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Clamper's Cavern. So yeah, that's all I can say about the music, is that I would say overall, it is a decent OST. It does have some tracks I do think are quite good and are memorable, and then there's some that are not memorable, but they're fitting and they're pretty decent. And the battle music, I just think is very underwhelming. But thankfully, I can say it's not loud and obnoxious and makes me want to turn it off immediately. It's tolerable enough. Now, before we get moving on, one thing I do have to mention that has to do with sound and all that is that this game has no voice acting in it. I was a bit surprised about that, given that there's so many games now that have voice acting in it. Not like I think every game needs to have voice acting in it to be good, but I was just a little surprised. But as we've been going through this video, you can probably take a guess why there isn't any, but we'll get there soon. Now, if you want to go out and buy yourself a copy of this game, the very few that I see on eBay right now as I'm doing this is about $50, and there's a sealed one going for $48. But what's really amusing to me is that I see a bundle of 5 PSP games that are Japan-only RPGs, and that whole bundle is selling for $63. And what's also ironic within that bundle is that right beside the copy of Arms Heart is a copy of Last Ranker, where the guy on the cover looks like Yuri. So the game isn't dirt cheap, but it's also not stupidly expensive either, but can we just be glad that there's a game out there that's obscure that is not over $100 for once? Alright, now, as for my overall thoughts on Arms Heart, is that this game had a lot to live up to, and I can say right now, I don't think it's as good as any of the Shadow Hearts games. And I'm also including Kudelka into that as well, which is also a game that I do kinda like, mainly for its story and all the other extra stuff, but the gameplay's a little rough. Whereas for this game, I would say it's about average, but man, this game could have been really something special. So let's get right into it. So I'm not going to make a recap about all the good things that I liked about it, because I've already talked about it pretty much, but if there's anything else I will add and say is that the story and characters, as far as I can tell, did seem to be pretty interesting, and I was kind of liking it for what it was, but of course, it's really hard to judge these things with a direct translator. But even with just the basic stuff, and with the world building that I was able to tell here, I actually do quite like it. And another good thing that I can say that I haven't talked about yet is that there's a couple dungeons that do have some light puzzles to them, but they are very easy. Most of them just consist of doing the whole attack ring thing onto it a couple times, or there are some where you just gotta press a couple buttons in the right order, which are very easy. So even without knowing Japanese, you can get through them no problem. But as for the not-so-good things that I've yet to talk about, yeah, unfortunately, this is the part that is going to be really painful for me to say, but well, someone has to do it. So the biggest complaint I have with this game is the goddamn encounter rate. Holy shit, why is it so damn high? It's been a while since I played a game with encounter rates that were this bad. I think the last one that I remember was that high school RPG on the Super Nintendo. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but I've reviewed it a couple years ago. But yeah, I honestly think that the encounter rate in this game is almost as bad as that. Hell, it might even be worse. It's been a long time since I played them, but either way though, the encounter rate is so awful in this game, it makes going through the dungeons like even more tedious and long as they already are. And what really sucks about this too is that, as far as I know, I could not find a single item in this game that reduces it. Normally in RPGs, items like that are pretty common and you can get them easily, but in this game, it's either there isn't any at all, or they are in here, but they're just so damn hard to get. I even experimented with the game's item crafting system, and even that, I had no luck finding anything. So that really sucks, and that's like the one thing that this game needed. But as for the battles themselves, probably my biggest complaint is with the cure status items. In this game, there's a 50% chance that the item won't work. And it's not only with curing status effects, it's even reviving your teammates when they go down. So there'll be times where you'll throw like a Phoenix down at a downed ally, and there's a chance that they won't even get back up, and therefore you just wasted a valuable item. Like, what the fuck is this? Phantasy Star 3? That's like the only game I can think of that did bullshit like that. And one other thing I do have to mention about the battle system is that when the attack ring shows up, it takes 5 seconds for the attack to fully commence, and then you start pressing the buttons to make out your attack. Now you're probably thinking, oh well, 5 seconds of your life? Well, that's not a big deal. And normally you'd be right just by thinking about it, but when you have to wait 5 seconds for to commence your attacks or your skills or whatever with every single character in your party, and the maximum is 4, it does make the battles drag on a little bit longer than they should. Now, I don't think this issue is as bad as like the other things that I mentioned, but I do think that this is one thing that they could have improved upon by making it much more snappier and fast. Because in Shadow Hearts, the whole Judgment Ring system, it really worked because it was fast and snappy, and it was fun and addicting, and it felt like a rhythm game. Where in this game, it almost feels like that, but unfortunately, the countdown that it does every time you do anything does slow things down quite a bit. And lastly I'll mention is that I feel like this game's concept was too ambitious for the game's budget. Like I already said, there's a lot of parts in this game where they definitely cut corners, where they reused a lot of sprites and they reused a lot of backgrounds for the dungeons. The animations during the battles are very lackluster, and like I already said, they look like something right out of an RPG Maker game. So anyways, knowing all this, I feel like this game should have had a bit of a bigger budget that would suit for an RPG game. Now obviously I'm not expecting a AAA budget, and I don't think everything needs to be AAA budget in order to be good, but in the case with Shadow Hearts, the budget of those games weren't ginormous like some of the ones for Sony games at the time, but yet they are some of the greatest games I ever played on a PS2, which really says a lot. Where with this game, I just don't think it had enough for it to manage a game like this. It feels like they were just barely scraping by, which is why a lot of things in this game feel cheap. Like, I'll give Hamster Corporation credit for trying to create something different for what they normally do, but I feel like maybe he should have stuck with a company that had some sort of experience with RPGs before that could utilize his budget better. Like, imagine if the director ended up going with companies like Gust, Red Entertainment, or even Neon Falcom. Man, could you imagine the Shadow Hearts director working for Neon Falcom? Wouldn't that be insane? But anyways, within the year 2010, I feel like if he would have like stuck with companies like that, where they're not super huge, but have had experience with working with RPGs that are a little bit on the smaller budget, but were still really good, there is a chance that this game might have actually been better. Of course, this is just wishful thinking for me, it doesn't mean anything at all, but I think it would have been interesting. But either way, I can say for sure that I didn't hate this game. It was disappointing, sure, but I didn't hate it. I didn't think it was awful. I actually do think it is legitimately better than a lot of the shovelware RPGs that get thrown out there by Kemco these days. And if you follow my channel long enough, then you definitely know for sure that it's better than a lot of these shitty RPGs that I covered, like Eternal Quest on PS2, though granted, that's not saying much, a lot of things are better than that. But I just think it's a pretty average game that could have been so much more. Now when it comes to recommendations, well, obviously with it being Japan only with no fan translation yet, yeah, you gotta be really desperate to play this game. So, kinda like me, I guess. And even if it does have a fan translation, I feel like the only people that will get the most enjoyment out of it are people that are already fans of Shadow Hearts and they want something a little bit different, but they've already played the same 3 games like over and over again. Or if you've never played a game in the series before, well, first of all, what are you doing here? You need to change that and go in and play the damn games, but okay, just kidding though. But in case you did wanted to play this game without playing any sort of Shadow Hearts game or Kudelka or anything like that at all, you're probably not gonna like it very much, and I can understand why, because yes, like I've been saying all the time, this game has a lot of flaws, and before anyone says that I'm just some fanboy for everything this guy does, well, actually, There is one game that was made by the company Saknoff that I have yet to review, and there's a reason for that. The game is called Dive Alert on the Neo Geo Pocket Color, and there's two versions, Matt's version and Becky's version. It's sort of like the whole Pokemon thing. I've mentioned this game when I talked about the game Phasely on the Neo Geo Pocket Color, but since then, I have tried out the game a couple times, and I gotta be honest guys, I could not stomach playing that game for 10 minutes. Every time I play it, I feel like I'm playing an Atari game, and there's really not much to say about it, which is why I never reviewed it. So there you go. That's proof that I don't love everything this guy works on, because Dive Alert is just crap. And as you can tell with Arms Heart, I don't love it either. But one last thing I will say before I end it here, and I know this video is getting a little long, but if someone went out of their way to fan translate this game into English, there are two mechanics that they have to address before releasing that patch, and that is to fix the encounter rate, that shit is awful, and make the countdown for attacking a lot quicker. If they can fix these two things, this would go from an average game to a decent game. Of course, there are still other problems, like the whole reviving people having a 50% chance, like that would still suck, and the low budget cheapness would still be a thing, but I can at least tolerate that. And I can probably recommend the game to more people than just the Shadow Hearts fans. It would at least be a decent game. So that's all I have to say about Arms Heart. As I've said a bunch of times already, it could have been really good, but unfortunately, it just didn't quite make it. But I'm glad to have finally experienced playing it after years of knowing about it, and not sure if it would ever get fan translated. But as you already know, it does need some work. So, with that being said, thank you for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.
Wow, Luigi, I'm a living legend!